Welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Ackerman. We're broadcasting live from the beautiful Hesselson Studio on Marcus Street in Corning. Today on the program, we'll be talking with Chemung County District Attorney Weeden Wetmore. That's coming up in just a little bit. We've got a lot to ask him. Hopefully, we can discuss the recent changes due to the New York State budget with bail reform. We'll see where that lands when in our interview. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this morning. I'm sure you've already been inundated with what is arguably the biggest story of the day, and that, of course, is Trump found liable for sexual abuse, defamation in the E. Jean Carroll case. He's ordered to pay $5 million in damages, as you see here from the New York Post. The 9-person jury, 3 women and 6 men, decided the case after 3 hours of deliberation. Now, of course, in typical Trump fashion, and I think we'd expect no less, he went to his social media outlet, Truth, to share his feelings on the verdict. I have absolutely no idea who this woman is. This verdict is a disgrace, a continuation of the greatest witch hunt of all time, that, of course, in all caps. Now, his attorney, speaking outside of the courthouse, said he's firm in his belief, as many people are, that he can't get a fair trial in New York City based on the jury pool. His attorney, Joe Tacopina, I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's as close as I can come, Tacopina, I think one could argue that's an accurate assessment based on what happened today. Now, a few hours after the initial tweet, the former president said, what else, again, all in caps, what else can you expect from a Trump-hating, Clinton-appointed judge who went out of his way to make sure that the result was as negative as it could possibly be, speaking to and in control of a jury from an anti-Trump area, which is probably the worst place in the U.S. for me to get a fair trial. So I would love to hear your take on this. There hasn't been... But listen, there's been a lot of coverage, don't get me wrong. But when it comes to reaction, we've heard from a few Republicans. Of course, we've heard from a lot of Democrats, a lot of Republicans that never supported Trump. That overall, I would say not a lot of people speaking out except for the usual suspects. Former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson criticizing the 45th president. Over the course of my 25 years of experience in the courtroom, I have seen firsthand how a cavalier and arrogant contempt for the rule of law can backfire. The jury verdict should be treated with seriousness and is another example of the indefensible behavior of Donald Trump. Now, Governor DeSantis' group or the governor himself has not weighed in on it. We know, at least according to the media, that's the big primary, challenge, Trump and DeSantis. Mo Brooks, another person who I think of Alabama, who we think, he was a former supporter of Trump, but no longer, saying guilty. $5 million sexual assault and defamation jury verdict. GOP cannot afford repeat sexual predator offender as 2024 presidential nominee. So strong language from people that are predisposed to dislike Trump, but I will say, and he's running for president, and I'm going to struggle with his name a little bit here, but he's been doing a very good job, just not getting a lot of coverage, but he's had some really fascinating opinion pieces out. He's an entrepreneur, and his name's Vivek Ramaswamy. He said, I'll say, and this is a quote, I'll say what everyone else is privately thinking. If the defendant weren't named Donald Trump, would we be talking about this today? Would there even be a lawsuit? This is a statement he released, again, running for president, Ramaswamy. I wasn't one of the jurors, and I'm not privy to all the facts that they have. But based on the sheer timing of the allegations that the alleged assault occurred in the mid-1990s, and Ms. Carroll did not sue until 2019 and later in 2022, far beyond the statute of limitations and in the middle of a spate of legal charges for other ancient allegations. It seems this is part of the establishment system's immune response against its chief political virus, Donald Trump. That is just one antibody, believe me. It'd be a lot easier if Trump weren't in this race. But in this country, we don't weaponize the law or decades-old allegations to undercut political opponents. I want to win this race because voters believe I can take the American First movement to the next level. I do think some of these trials, some of these charges, and I don't think anti-Trump people want to accept that. I think in the long run, many times, at least in President Trump and his supporters, it makes him, as he said, witch hunt. It keeps pushing that narrative that he's, and listen, time and time again, many people see this and say, just like that candidate there, Ramaswamy, saying that this seems politically motivated. So that's why I bring this up, because I would love to hear from you. There's our contact information. What did you think about the verdict found liable for sexual abuse and defamation? I would love to hear your take. I know Liz Cheney, who many, I say many, I think it might be only Liz Cheney's friends, believe that she could be president and may be running for president. She released an ad, though she is not physically in the ad. It's her voice calling out the former president. Donald Trump is the only president in American history who has refused to guarantee the peaceful transfer of power, says the video. And this is going to air very soon. But kind of the normal cast of characters. So again, I would love to hear your take on it. We're not going to spend too much more time on it because, as I said, you probably have been inundated with it so far, but I would love to hear your opinion on it. Let's take that first break, just a short break, and then we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, as we were talking about the verdict against former President Trump, and I asked you to write in. We've already received one statement. I think this is a good point. As they say, quote, "He who lives in glass houses shouldn't throw stones." And you know what karma is. So please weigh in on what you think of the verdict. I believe that, and oh, here we go, another one. I agree, complete witch hunt. And see that, again, fits what former president, Trump has been saying. Speaking of the former president, I mentioned this last week, and I was kind of fascinated by the prospect of this. So the former president, and talk about timing after the verdict, is scheduled to be on CNN tonight for a town hall style meeting. Now, I think a lot of Trump supporters, red flags would go up. Why CNN? And I got to show you, because I'm always fascinated by media coverage, and excuse me if that's kind of nerdy, but here is the media making it about the media. Now, this coming from the AP. Trump form a big test for CNN moderator Caitlin Collins. There's the moderator there on your screen. She will be moderating the event. I would say that's not a position I would envy. This could get very interesting tonight, especially considering it's CNN, who has never historically been a fan of the former president. So that is tonight at 8 o'clock. We'll see. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it tomorrow on the program. Also, because the media had this narrative, just like the President Trump has said, the witch hunt, the media, of course, going after him throughout his whole time in office. The media also painted this narrative that Melania didn't want to be there, that Melania didn't support her husband in some way, and there's always the stories about, could there be divorce, this, that, and the other thing. Fox did a great interview with her where she said it would be a privilege to serve as First Lady again. My husband achieved tremendous success in his first administration, and he can lead us toward greatness and prosperity once again. He has my support, and we look forward to restoring hope for the future and leading America with love and strength. And again, that was kind of necessary for Fox to highlight, because again, the media's coverage of that marriage was, really unprecedented for a president. Very negative. I remember one of the first negative stories coming out of the administration was that Melania wore high heels on Air Force One, and it was a big scandal. So we have talked about the Trump campaign and about this verdict and about just things surrounding Trump probably for long enough now. But if you would like to weigh in, I would love to hear from you. We may talk about George Santos. I'm sure you've seen the news on that by now, charged by the Justice Department in a federal probe. But we've got to take a short break. Wow, we are running fast. It's going to be one of those mornings. You got to stay with us because we're going to talk with Weeden Wetmore in just a little bit. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Just before we're joined by our guest, I wanted to highlight something that we've been bringing to you for a few weeks now. Don't forget, coming up today is that college fair. Chris Callis has been on the program a few times to highlight it. It is coming up today, as you see, Wednesday, 6 to 8 p.m. at the Elmira Elks Lodge. That's 300 Gray Street, so don't miss out on that. We've been highlighting that extensively over the last few weeks, so I think it's a great opportunity for all our students out there who are looking to find out more about colleges of their choice, find out what kind of grades they need, what kind of sports they have. So I wanted to highlight that before we take a break, and we'll be joined by our guest in just a second. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and this is the M.A. Neal Financial Services section of our program. And joining me in the studio is Weeden Wetmore. Good morning.
Morning, Frank.
Thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. I thought we could start with some of the kind of simple questions. Tell us a little bit about what it means to be a Chemung County District Attorney, what your responsibilities are.
Well, I've been doing this since 1978. Okay. During the 44 years after I was admitted to practice law, 36 of those have been with the district attorney's office. 23 have been full-time, 13 part-time. I was also in private practice for a number of years. What does it mean? Well, some people think that we can affect lives, that we can affect how people obey the laws in Chemung County. I'm not so sure that we can.
Okay.
I think maybe that was true when I came out of law school. Maybe the role of the prosecutor was such he could set the tone in the community. I'm not so sure. I think it's more about putting pieces back together after crimes have been committed, seeking justice. And that's one of the things I try to do. I try to be fair. I try to, as the district attorney, instill that in my staff, try to be fair in their handling of criminal cases, seek sentences that are appropriate for the crime. For the violent crimes, yes, seek incarceration where it merits it. Try to have some mercy in your heart when you indeed deal with less fortunate people that perhaps commit property crimes that are still significant. But overall, I think the role of a prosecutor in Chemung County has been to seek justice, and to try to be fair in the criminal justice system, to be an advocate oftentimes for the victims who don't have a voice.
Sure. What I guess are the biggest changes you've seen in your time in the district attorney's office?
Well, obviously everybody wants to talk now about bail reform.
Of course.
That's obviously a big change. Or is it? It is a big change in a sense that it's a revolving door for many people that commit property crimes. They can commit certain larcenies. They can commit certain burglaries and still be released. Sure. On the other hand, it's been the same for violent felonies. We generally get good bail set on those cases to hold those people pending trial. But to me, the more recent law that has really affected us is the discovery reform.
Sure.
It requires us to turn over all materials to those people who are incarcerated prior to trial within 20 days. And if they're not being held, it requires us to turn over all the materials in 35 days. Okay, so it makes us do that. Unfortunately, it also makes us turn over the names of witnesses and addresses of people who are potential witnesses to the case. And that has a chilling effect. Many people are afraid to come forward.
Of course.
Many people might be somebody's neighbor in a case. We can apply for protective orders, but in general, this broad, open discovery has a chilling effect on justice. And I think that's an area, although the new budget, or rather in the new governor's new budget, there has been some talk of some discovery reform as well as some bail reform.
But with the bail reform, I mean, that was changed really minute. But do you see an avenue we actually have any change in discovery?
Well, yeah, I think that was a minute change. I think that it gives some of the judges more discretion to consider what are the factors for setting bail. Before, you had to consider also the least onerous for the those that qualify for bail offenses, the least onerous method. Now you can take it; the courts can take into consideration the person's possibility that he will flee.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives a little more discretion to the judges. I don't think it's a great change in the bail reform, in the bail laws.
No. How did you adapt to the discovery and bail reform when that first came out?
Well, the problem is, let's talk about discovery. With
Sure.
respect to discovery, it kind of turns many of my ADAs into clerks because now they must go through all the materials, review them, gather them together, send over the materials, and file a certificate of compliance. And they have to do this automatically. It used to be, under discovery, we would wait for defense counsel to serve us with discovery papers.
Oh, okay.
So that, and for the most part, I've kind of had an open discovery, open file policy in the office. But now that you've got to produce...
It's mandatory.
It's mandatory, and you've got to produce, as I say, the names of witnesses, but you also have to produce radio traffic, 911 calls, body cameras. It creates it's a cost.
Mm-hmm.
We have to store these materials. We've had to hire more staff. It's expensive. You had to hire more secretaries, more attorneys to do this. And when you're coming out of law school, I don't think you envision that you're going to sit there in front of your desk just doing discovery.
Right.
And they don't just do it; they do other materials. But it is an onerous part of the job. And
you never saw that on Perry Mason.
no, of course not. You never see that. It's that's a romanticized version. We don't see that. It's
A lot of
tedious and time consuming.
Have you seen, going back to bail reform, have you seen a lot of repeat offenders?
Yeah, in a sense we have. But there's many people who maybe they go to the mall, maybe they go to Walmart, they go to those kinds of stores. That's where we see them because they walk in and they commit the crime of larceny. They know they can be released. They're not going to necessarily go right to jail. So then those people turn around, they walk back into court and commit another crime. Sometimes we can go back to court that released them originally and ask for bail set on those cases.
Okay.
So we've seen a lot of repeat offenders in that respect. I don't think the bail reform has caused repeat offenders with respect to violent crimes. Okay. I think there's a whole sentiment, or rather just the mood in the entire country, what is going on in the entire country has an effect on violent crime, and it's increased crime. But the repeat offenders, it's in the property crimes, it's in the misdemeanors, and they're still significant. But with respect to violent crimes, we see a lot of that, but it's not necessarily repeat offenders because of bail reform.
Now, you mentioned that you had to hire on quite a few people to deal with the paperwork from so many of these issues that we've been talking about. Has that been a problem, staffing? Because I know in the sheriff's office we've talked about it. It seems like actually anybody we've talked to has had issues with staffing.
It is particularly difficult in upstate New York to recruit attorneys. We've had a shortage of applicants. And we've had to increase our staff. All right. So I know that one of my ADAs will be leaving shortly, and that's a position he wants.
Good.
But we're going to be hard pressed to fill that position immediately. The problem is many people coming out of law school don't necessarily want to go into field of prosecution. My son graduated a few years ago from Northeastern Law School, and he says, quite frankly, in that law school, the professors do not promote prosecution as a career. Restorative justice is being taught, I suppose.
Okay.
The problem with lawyers, also prosecutors, the governor's budget recently approved monies for assigned counsel. The assigned counsel rate's going to go to $158 an hour. Now that may not mean much if you've got to start a practice and fund secretaries and overhead and all that, but if you've already got a practice,
Right.
and you can do this part-time, you're going to make quite a bit of money. If you work 20 hours a week doing criminal law, you can make over $160,000. And the county has to foot 50% of that bill, where the state will foot another 50% of the bill. So, again, that draws away perhaps from the potential pool of prosecutors. But it has been difficult. One of the things I did was asked for an expansion of the locality rule. In Chemung County, it used to be, until last year, you had to live in Chemung County to be in the DA's office because we're public officers.
Okay.
All right? I've been able to expand that within 60 miles. In fact, I have 2 attorneys who live in the Corning area
Oh, great.
who are assistant DAs. But for that, we would have been limited to the pool of lawyers in Chemung County, which is far more limited.
Sure. How does the shortage affect the district attorney's office in general?
How does it? Well, obviously, with the more discovery, we have a lot of work. It just trickles down. It's a lot more work for all the attorneys in the office. That's how it affects it directly. It also affects morale sometimes. You know, the people are working long hours. I have a young staff because, indeed, we train them, and oftentimes ADAs want to leave for richer environs, right?
Yeah.
Go into private practice,
Of course,
or
yeah.
go into other fields where perhaps it's not as time-consuming or tedious. I've lost people who were experienced. They become law clerks, and they make more money. So it is difficult, but the call of prosecution is a strong one as well, and I think
Okay.
people who are career prosecutors enjoy the challenges that they're faced with.
So it sounds like, going back to really the beginning of the program, discovery has been quite a burden on your office.
Yes, in fact, what's unfortunate is, although the state has set aside $40 million for discovery to be distributed throughout the counties throughout the state. The state, in their recent budget, also approved $40 million for discovery for the defense side.
Okay.
We traditionally do not get much, if anything,
Right.
from the defense bar and discovery. So where's that $40 million for discovery going to go?
Yeah.
It costs money. We've had to increase staff. It costs money for storage. It costs money for computers.
Oh, of course.
So overall, yeah, it's unfortunately it's an extreme burden, and of course I come back to the most damning effect of the discovery is the chilling effect on witnesses, and unfortunately there's a lot of violent crime, and we've had people who are victims of gunshot. They refuse to come forward.
Yeah.
They refuse to cooperate.
Yeah.
So it's difficult.
That sounds very difficult. Speaking of difficult, I talked with recently Steuben County District Attorney Brooks Baker, and we were talking about COVID. How bad was the COVID pandemic for your office, and are you still dealing with the paperwork and still dealing with some of the headache?
Well, COVID, you know, we had some people deemed essential. There were 3 of us, me, the chief assistant, and 1 secretary for a couple of months. When we did get our office back to full staff, we had to address, you know, there wasn't grand jury at first. Preliminary hearings, if somebody was arrested, we had to do preliminary hearings. The court was off limits for us, unfortunately, so we actually did some preliminary hearings on the front porch of the district attorney's
really?
office outside. When we finally got started with grand jury, we spread the grand jurors out in the county courtroom. If that was being used for trial, we went to other places. Went to YMCA Gymnasium. We went to Southside High School, old Southside High School. It's now the Department of Social Services building where there were auditoriums. And so we handled the grand jury. There were tremendous backload in cases. Some of the things that perhaps came out of COVID were okay, such as Teams or Zoom, where people can prosecute, they can appear remotely. When I say prosecute and defense and the court, everybody. That's still in use in some of our lower courts,
Okay.
and that perhaps is a good thing. On a couple occasions, we have we've been able to ask the court for permission to question witnesses, even for grand jury proceedings, by this use of technology, where they didn't have to come. Maybe they're in Arizona,
Right.
somewhere else. So, in terms of COVID, I think we've caught up on the backlog of cases. Trust me, the judges cracked the whip, and and they always said we will back off if you need it, but we tended to address many concerns of those courts. So
Of course.
we've kind of caught up on that.
Now, I do realize that you are running for re-election. We're going to talk about that in a second, but how'd the petition process go?
Well, the petition process went very well.
Okay.
Unfortunately, not unfortunately, but I had some surgery in January of this year. Had my prostate removed. So the petition process
Was even more difficult then.
well, it was more difficult, but fortunately, the Republican committee members
agreed.
got out and they carried those petitions, and they did a tremendous job. And I still have thank you notes I haven't filled out yet to send to everyone. If they're listening now, thank you very much, because that was a tremendous help. Because usually I go out and carry and get lots of signatures, but I was a limited. Plus, working full time, it's also difficult to get
Of
those
course.
petitions signed. But we were able to accomplish that, so that's not a problem.
That's good. Why did you decide to run for re-election?
Why did I decide to run for election? That's what my wife was asking. But after spending 3 weeks at home following the surgery, she wants me to return to. No, I've been doing this since 1978 when I graduated from law school. Of the 44 years as a practicing lawyer, 23 have been full-time in the district attorney's office, another 13 part-time, so 36 altogether. I've enjoyed it. It's challenging. Coming out of law school, I wanted to do trial law. In fact, I had applied to the Navy Judge Advocate Program because you can do trial law. Other areas where you can do trial law is in the field of criminal justice, whether it be as a defense lawyer or as a prosecutor. I chose prosecution. I enjoy it. I still enjoy the challenge of trial. I think juries get it right most of the time, and I think we trust in that jury system. This is an area of law where I can serve the public, and there is some reward to that in serving the public. Can I prevent crime? No. But as I said earlier, we kind of can pick up the pieces. Mm-hmm. We can provide a salve of sorts to victims. We can, restore them. They get closure, as they say.
Okay.
I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the challenge. I have a lot of friends throughout the state in prosecution, former assistant DAs that have prosecuted people. The Wendy's murder down in New York City, a guy by the name of Bob Masters, tremendous assist to us. He prosecuted those cases. Jack Ryan, Queens District Attorney's Office. He also became the Queens DA briefly. There are tremendous attorneys throughout. There's a camaraderie among those people. So it's not just Chemung County. We're part of the New York State District Attorneys Association. I've enjoyed it. And I worked under two tremendous mentors. D. Bruce Crew III, otherwise known as Pete, who passed away a couple of years ago. Tremendous trial attorney. Went on to become a Supreme Court judge after he was district attorney. Went to the appellate division. Tremendous jurist. Jim Hayden, as a district attorney, tremendous trial lawyer, tremendous incisive skills when it came to reviewing a case, and then he was a tremendous judge. I've had people who have come to Chemung County as special prosecutors, who later went on to become superintendent of New York State Police. He thought that Jim Hayden was the finest county court judge in the state of New York, and he had tried cases all over. So I had tremendous mentors, and that kind of pushed me into in this direction, I suppose.
Well, just before we go, how can people help your re-election campaign?
How can they help my re-election campaign? Well, fortunately, I'm running unopposed
So
at
that
this
makes it-
point.
that makes
Okay.
it- Okay.
So I guess just get out and vote.
Just get out and vote.
Just get out and vote.
That's beautiful. Well, hey, thanks so much for being on the program this morning.
All right.
See,
Well,
this
thank
was
you.
easy. This was easy, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was easier. All right. Thank you very
All right.
much.
We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WIDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. Thanks again to Weeden Wetmore, of course, Chemung County District Attorney, for being our guest during the M.A. Neal Financial Services interview section of our program. I am your host, Frank Acom. This is Frankly Speaking. We're broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio on Market Street in Corning on this beautiful day. We've got a great lineup coming up all week, so you always want to tune in starting at 7 a.m. right here to Frankly Speaking. Now, I don't want to go too much in depth. We have a lot of big stories this morning about New York, and we're already running late. George Santos was charged by the Justice Department in the federal probe. I will say, Kevin McCarthy saying, just like we had before with Jeff Fortberry, he was found guilty, and then I told him he needed to resign. So McCarthy signaling that, if something comes of this, yes, of course I'd ask him to resign. But I wanted to mention, and it was, you may remember, gubernatorial candidate for New York, great guy, Mark Molinaro. He recently was elected to Congress. He said, quote, "You have the president calling into question the very Constitution. Leadership trying to negotiate during both a debt and a budget crisis and a border crisis. And here we are, yet again, talking about someone who just shouldn't be a member of Congress. The day we no longer have to discuss George Santos as a member of Congress will be a good day for America." But, of course, this is the kind of story that the media loves to highlight. We are going to take a short break. No, I have a second. Hold on. I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to talk about some New York State issues. As we just highlighted there, something we talked about yesterday, the negotiations on the debt ceiling, not necessarily a success. Now they're going to meet again on Friday, but they want to make clear, maybe because they watched Frankly Speaking and they heard my criticism, they want to make clear that the staff is going to meet every single day on this, but they, meaning McCarthy and Biden, will be meeting in the Oval Office again on Friday. The president said, he made it clear during the meeting, that default is not an option. Well, then negotiate. So what Republicans put forward is not an option, not even looking at it. And now the default is not an option. Well, where do we got to meet here? Where are we going? Of course, we don't want to see a default, but we also have to have good faith negotiations, and it doesn't seem like the Democrats are willing to even give the proposal by the Republicans a chance to start as a starting point for the negotiations. Biden said, "I'll be blunt with you. When we get by this, I'm thinking about taking a look at this months down the road." What's he referring to? That is suggesting that the debt ceiling is unconstitutional. We've heard this in the past. They're trying to find a way to change the rules mid-game so that they can just rubber stamp a clean debt ceiling increase. And, it was, and I am going to run late on this, I knew I was, Joe Manchin saying Biden's being hypocritical on this, on the debt limit. We've always had talks in divided government. It's just not reasonable, and it's not practical, and it's something that it's hypocritical to say that we're not going to do it now, meaning negotiate. And we've done it every time there's been a split in the party. The only time that I know there hasn't been a big discussion is when one party, whether it be Republican, have the White House, the House, and the Senate, or the Democrats have all three. So it's not reasonable to expect Republicans who just won the majority, a little over 100 days, to go in and just rubber stamp this clean debt ceiling increase when there are obviously spending cuts we can make and should make as we see inflation grow and this outrageous spending that we've had for so long under this administration. Let's take another short break. Stay with us. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we come back. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting from the Hesselson's studio. Just to wrap up our quick discussion on the debt ceiling, and then I'm going to read a few messages before we take a break that we've received from you. So why don't I put that up? That's a perfect time to put that up if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or criticisms on any of the topics we've discussed today. So with the debt ceiling, so many Republicans have signaled, and speaking of someone we mentioned earlier, Mark Molinaro, many others saying, listen, there's no appetite for a clean debt ceiling. But we'll have the negotiations, we'll have the discussions with Biden, but Biden, as Manchin said, wants something that's not reasonable. He just wants a rubber stamp, and that's not what the Republicans were given the majority to do, is to just go along to get along. Now, as I mentioned, we've got a few comments about the topics we've had so far this morning. I would normally put them up on the screen, but I have not had an opportunity yet, so I thought I'd just read them. Again, contact us right there with your questions, comments, concerns, and criticisms. Okay, so first one. The current administration uses the same formula. Tear things down irresponsibly, then take credit for building things back in their Picasso interpretation of good governing. Good point. And just to show you, of course, that I am fair. Where is it? Oh, we had one that was, okay. This is in regards to our first topic about the verdict against the former president. I don't understand. Anybody could come forward and say 25 to 30 years ago, this happened, and no one has a leg to stand on. I mean, unless there was pictures. I don't know. He's a moron, but it's wrong, referring to Trump. So not a Trump supporter there, but feels that maybe this, well, I'm not going to put words in their mouth, but I think a lot of people feel that many of these trials are politically motivated, or at least worry, no matter what side should be worried, that it's setting a precedent when you talk about quote unquote politicians that maybe the people in power don't like. Do we now use the justice system to go after them? Well, we may have here a few more comments when we come back. I don't want to run too late because there's one New York State issue I'd love to bring up. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity and we'll have time. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox. We'll be right back. We are back with Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank Acom. I wanted to bring this story to you because I know we talked about it with Assemblyman Phil Palmisano, and we actually have a statement from him on it. Female corrections officers say that the new law has led to increased harassment. You have the HALT law, but female prison employees said they feared for their safety or suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder after incidents in which they were inappropriately touched or faced sexually charged comments from those in custody. It has a lot to do with the HALT Act, which ended the solitary confinement. They're calling for not prolonged solitary confinement. That's not the right word, but to actually put that back on the table. But what the opposition says is experts and health organizations have likened solitary confinement to torture. The punishment places individuals alone in special units for up to 17 hours a day. So the reason I mention this is Assemblyman Phil Palmisano released a statement, and I thought it was a very good point on this. He's looking for the passage of Bill, I don't know if you want me to read this or not, A1606 and S5506 to make sexual assault of corrections officers a felony offense. Yes, as of right now, it is a misdemeanor offense. So as you see his quote, we have a dangerous staffing, violence, security, and safety crisis going on inside our state and city correctional facilities. It is long overdue for the state legislature to pass a common sense legislation that would make sexual assault against a corrections officer a felony. Currently, it is only a misdemeanor to sexually assault a corrections officer. This is abhorrent, completely unacceptable, and must be corrected immediately. Sexual assault in the workplace should not be tolerated. Of course, thank you, Assemblyman Phil Palmisano. This is another reason. Think of how many people we've talked to, sheriffs, saying we don't have corrections officers. People do not want to work because of the HALT Act, or because, I mean, for heaven's sakes, think about that. A misdemeanor in that scenario is disgusting. He continued, Assemblyman Phil Palmisano, we have a growing number of female corrections officers in our state. In fact, over 40% of our brave corrections officers working on Rikers Island in New York City are women. And these dedicated female employees have seen a rise in sexual assaults committed against them by incarcerated individuals. Unfortunately, these brave and dedicated women must go to work every day, not knowing if they will be harassed or assaulted by an inmate. We heard courageous stories today from several brave corrections officers who have been sexually assaulted by inmates. I want to thank each and every one of them for bravely sharing their stories so the legislature can see the women who are victims of these violent acts. It's amazing to me that this has already not been addressed. I'm glad Palmisano and so many others are speaking out on this. They also called for specifically the repeal of the Hull Act, which limits the use of segregated confinement for dangerous prisoners. The passage of the Hull Act has caused a steep increase in violence within the correctional facilities. So tying in with many of our topics today, I thought that was appropriate to discuss, and I'm glad that someone's speaking out against it. So hopefully we can get, just for the safety of everyone, more corrections officers as there is a shortage. We have to take our last break, and then we'll be back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. So it is going to be chaotic for a while. That's what President Biden has said about the new change in Title 42. I guess the end of Title 42 at the border. It's going to be chaotic for a while. Tens of thousands of people are massing at border crossing points, awaiting the expiration of Title 42, which will happen overnight Thursday into Friday. Asked if the United States was ready for a surge in crossing, Biden told reporters it remains to be seen. It's going to be chaotic for a while. That does not sound like a game plan. Governor Hochul yesterday declared a state of emergency due to the arrival of increased number of migrants seeking shelter in New York City. But we've talked about this in the past. They're claiming they're running out of room in New York City. Will this become an issue for upstate? We've already had a few rumblings of that in the past. Meanwhile, a number of upstate communities, including its self-declared sanctuary cities, are awaiting guidance from state and federal officials amid the bitter political fight over the asylum seekers arriving in overmatched New York City. If they can't handle it in New York City, how do they believe a small town, a rural area, in our rural area is going to be able to handle it? Sanctuary cities, they made that decision, but other upstate communities will just not be prepared for it. If New York City's not prepared for it, with help, aid, it's just not. It's not going to be a good. I don't even want to say good fit. It's going to be dangerous for those that have been put in upstate areas because the infrastructure is not there to handle it. Again, if the infrastructure isn't there in New York City, it's not in where? In Addison or. Well, I was going to say Ithaca, but Ithaca actually, I think, is a sanctuary city. Corning, Elmira, wherever the case may be, any small town in between. But I'm rambling because I know that we're out of time and I hate to go. It's been such a fun show. Thank you to Whedon Wetmore, Chemung County District Attorney, for being our guest. We learned a lot from the District Attorney this morning, so we appreciate that. Thank you to everybody that wrote in. Keep them coming. There's my contact info right on the way out the door. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll be back starting tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Have a great day, everyone.